They say blood is thicker than water, but that night at dinner, I realized my family's blood was just ice. "Pass the salt, dear." "And the keys to the penthouse?" my mother said, her voice as smooth as the silk scarf wrapped around her neck. She didn't look at me. She looked at my sister, Ashley, who was already scrolling through interior design catalogs on her gold-plated phone. "Wait," I said, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "The penthouse?" Grandma always told me we would split the estate evenly. She knew how hard I worked to take care of her in those final months. My father let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was a bark. He leaned forward, the chandelier light reflecting off his expensive watch, the one I'd bought him for his 50th birthday, when I was still trying to buy their love. "Split? You've always been delusional," he sneered. "Ashley has a reputation to uphold. She's marrying into the DuPont family. She needs the luxury apartments in the city. She needs the image. You've always been the family's little charity project." The air left my lungs. I looked at Ashley. She didn't even look up from her screen. "Don't be dramatic," she muttered. "You're getting the farmhouse. It's rustic." "Rustic?" I whispered. "It's a ruin. The roof is caving in. It hasn't been inhabited in 30 years. It's 5 hours away from the nearest city." My mother finally looked at me, her eyes cold and dismissive. "It's exactly what you deserve. You've achieved nothing. You have no career, no prospects, and frankly, you're just useless. You deserve nothing, so we're giving you the closest thing to it." Then came the laughter. It started with my father, a deep, mocking rumble, and then Ashley joined in, her high-pitched giggle cutting through me like a serrated blade. They sat there, in their designer clothes, eating a meal I had spent 4 hours cooking, laughing at my life. "Get out," my father said suddenly. The laughter stopped, replaced by a terrifying hardness. "What?" I gasped. "You heard me. You're 24. We're tired of looking at your disappointed face. The farmhouse deed is in that envelope by the door. Take it and go. Tonight." "It's raining," I pleaded, looking toward the window where a storm was beginning to lash against the glass. "Please just let me stay until morning." "I don't care if it's snowing," he said, standing up and towering over me. "You're a drain on this family. Go rot in that shack. Maybe it'll finally teach you the value of $1. He grabbed my arm, not enough to bruise, but enough to show his disdain, and marched me toward the foyer. My mother didn't even look up from her wine. Ashley just turned a page in her catalog. He shoved the manila envelope into my chest and opened the front door. The cold wind whipped into the warm, scented hallway. "Don't come back," he said. "Unless you've actually managed to become someone, which we all know won't happen." The door slammed shut, the lock clicked. I stood on the porch of the mansion I grew up in, clutching an envelope and my car keys. I had no money in my savings. I'd spent it all on Grandma's private nurses and the specialized equipment the insurance wouldn't cover. I had sacrificed my career to be her primary caregiver while my parents traveled the world and Ashley went to parties. I drove for 5 hours through the blinding rain, my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. When I finally reached the iron gates of the farmhouse, they were rusted shut. I had to climb over them, my clothes soaking through, my boots sinking into the thick mud. The house sat on a hill, a dark, jagged silhouette against the gray sky. It looked like a tomb. The porch groaned under my weight. The wood was soft with rot. I fumbled with the old skeleton key from the envelope, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. The door creaked open with a scream of rusted hinges. The smell hit me first dust, old paper, and something sharp, like ozone. I clicked on my heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating cobwebs that hung like funeral shrouds from the ceiling. I made my way toward the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I just wanted to find a dry spot to sleep until the sun came up. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But then, the floorboard beneath the kitchen island gave way. My legs sank through the wood, and I let out a cry of pain. As I struggled to pull myself out, the beam of my flashlight hit something reflecting in the hole I'd just made. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't a pipe. It was metal. A heavy industrial-grade steel door, hidden beneath the floorboards of this useless farmhouse. I pulled back more of the rotten wood, my fingernails bleeding, the adrenaline masking the pain. I cleared enough space to see a keypad. An old one, but the red light was still blinking. It had power. I remembered the last thing Grandma whispered to me in the hospital. She was drifting in and out, her voice a mere thread. The birthday child, the real one, not the one they celebrate. At the time, I thought she was senile. My family always celebrated my birthday on June 12th. But Grandma had once shown me an old family Bible where my birth was recorded as June 11th at 11:59 p.m. My parents had changed it because they thought the 12th sounded more prestigious. With trembling fingers, I punched in 0611. A heavy thud echoed through the silent house. The steel door hissed and a pneumatic seal broke. I pulled the door open. A set of concrete stairs led down into a darkness so deep it felt heavy. I stepped down, one stair at a time, the air growing colder, cleaner. When I reached the bottom, I fumbled for a light switch on the wall. The lights flickered to life row after row of hummed fluorescent tubes. My blood ran cold. My breath hitched in my throat. I wasn't in a cellar. I wasn't in a basement. I was standing in a high-tech command center, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling server racks, encrypted monitors, and something else, something that shouldn't exist. On the central desk sat a single black leather notebook with my name embossed in gold on the cover. Beside it was a hardware wallet and a stack of documents that made my breath stop. Grandma wasn't just a sweet old lady who liked gardening, and this useless farmhouse was about to become my family's worst nightmare. Do you want to know what was inside that notebook? And what Grandma was really hiding from the rest of the family? Before we continue, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the moment I take everything back. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I love reading your stories from all over the world. The air in the bunker felt different than the air in the farmhouse above. Up there, everything smelled of decay and forgotten dreams. Down here, it smelled of ozone, expensive cooling systems, and power. I walked toward the central desk, my boots echoing on the polished concrete floor. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low, steady hum of the server racks that lined the walls like obsidian sentinels. My hands were still shaking as I picked up the black leather notebook. The gold embossing of my name felt like a brand. It was a message from beyond the grave, a secret kept in plain sight while my parents and Ashley treated Grandma like a senile burden. I opened the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, sharp, elegant, and disciplined, but the words didn't match the woman I thought I knew. There were no recipes for apple pie or notes about the garden. Instead, there were strings of alphanumeric codes, bank routing numbers for offshore accounts in places I couldn't pronounce, and a detailed map of my father's corporate infrastructure. To my dearest granddaughter, the first page began. They think I spent my life being a dutiful wife to a man who didn't deserve me. They think I was a quiet observer. They were wrong. I was the architect of this family's wealth, and I am the only one who knows exactly where the foundations are cracked. You are the only one with the heart to handle the truth, and the only one they were foolish enough to cast aside. I sat in the ergonomic chair, the leather cool against my damp skin. My eyes darted to the monitors. I pressed a key on the main console, and the screens flickered to life. Suddenly, I wasn't just looking at a computer, I was looking at everything. Grandma had built a private surveillance and data mining network that bypassed every firewall known to man. She had backdoors into my father's real estate conglomerate. She had access to Ashley's private messages, her shopping habits, and the discretionary funds she thought she was hiding from her fiancé. But the most shocking part was the hardware wallet sitting next to the notebook. I plugged it into the console as the notebook instructed. A balance appeared on the screen. I counted the zeros once, then twice. Then a third time, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. $30 million. Not in property, not in stocks that could be frozen or contested, but in cold, untraceable cryptocurrency and offshore liquid assets. Useless, I whispered, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. I thought about my father's face as he pushed me into the rain. I thought about my mother's bored expression as she watched me get exiled from the only home I'd ever known. They had given me this ruin because they thought it was a graveyard for my future. They had no idea they had handed me the keys to their destruction. I spent the next 6 hours reading. The notebook was a manual. Grandma had been planning this for years. She knew my father was embezzling funds from the family trust to cover his gambling debts. She knew Ashley's fiancé, a DuPont, was actually a fraudster on the verge of bankruptcy who was only marrying Ashley to get his hands on the family's city apartments. The betrayal ran deeper than just me. My parents were being played by Ashley's perfect match, and they were too blinded by status to see it. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. For the first time in years, the weight of being the disappointment lifted. I wasn't the failure. I was the one holding the fuse to a bomb they didn't even know was under their feet. I looked at the cameras Grandma had installed around the farmhouse grounds. I saw my old car, battered and muddy, sitting at the gate. I looked like a stray dog they'd kicked to the curb. But as I scrolled through the files, I found a folder titled The Final Clause. I opened it. It was a digital copy of a codicil to Grandma's will, one that had never been filed with the family lawyers. It stated that if the farmhouse was ever transferred to me, I would also inherit a controlling stake in the holding company that owned my father's office building. He didn't even own the roof over his own head. Grandma did. And now I did. They wanted me to rot in the mud? Fine. I would build a kingdom in it. I pulled up a chair and began to type. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the muscle memory from my college coding classes, the ones my father called a waste of time for a girl coming back in a rush. I wasn't going to just take their money. That was too easy. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized that the nothing they gave me was actually everything they had left. The first step was simple. I accessed my father's private server. I didn't delete anything. I didn't change his passwords. I just adjusted a few numbers in his upcoming merger deal, just enough to trigger a red flag with the SEC. Then, I turned my attention to Ashley. She was currently at a high-end spa, using a credit card that was tied to a trust Grandma had set up. Click. Account frozen. I watched the live feed of her transaction on the screen. In a small window, I could see her standing at a marble counter, her face turning a bright, ugly red as the receptionist handed her back the card. This was only the beginning. I looked at a photo of myself on the desk, a photo Grandma had kept. I was 10 years old, smiling, before the years of being told I was useless had dimmed my light. "I've got this, Grandma," I whispered. But as I scrolled further into the server's depths, I saw a file that made my breath hitch again. It was labeled with my mother's name and a date from 20 years ago. It wasn't about money, it was about me. As I clicked it open, a video began to play. It was a grainy black and white recording from a nursery. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as I realized that the people I called my parents had been lying to me since the day I was born. The secret inside that video changed everything. It wasn't just about a farmhouse anymore. It was about a crime that had been covered up for decades. I stood up, pacing the small room. The useless daughter was gone. The architect was here. But I needed to be careful. If they knew I was here, if they knew what I had found, they wouldn't just laugh at me. They would try to stop me. I looked at the stairs leading back up to the rotten kitchen. I would stay here. I would live in the shadows of this ruin while I dismantled their lives piece by piece. But first, I had to find out who I really was. What was on that video? And why did my parents look at me with such hatred all those years? The video played in a silent loop, the flickering gray light illuminating the bunker like a heartbeat. I sat there, paralyzed, watching a woman who looked nothing like my mother holding a baby that I knew, with a soul-deep certainty, was me. In the recording, my parents were in the background. They weren't mourning, they were negotiating. I watched my father hand a thick envelope to a man in a dark suit, while my mother looked at the baby in the crib with a look of pure, unadulterated resentment. She didn't want a child. She wanted an accessory. And when the real mother, the woman holding me with such desperation, began to weep, my father roughly pulled her away. The file was titled The Settlement. I wasn't their daughter. I was a transaction. I leaned back, the coldness of the bunker finally seeping into my bones. Everything made sense now. The way they looked at me like I was a stain on the rug. The way Ashley was showered with gold while I was given the scraps. I wasn't the useless daughter. I was the evidence of a secret they had tried to bury 24 years ago. You didn't just take my inheritance, I whispered into the empty room. You took my life. Grandma knew. That was why she had left me this house. It wasn't a farmhouse. It was an armory. She had spent decades collecting the weapons I would need to finish what she started. She had been the one to record that video. She had been the silent witness to their cruelty, waiting for the day I would be strong enough or desperate enough to see it. I pulled up the documents linked to the video. My biological mother's name was Nicole. She had been a young assistant at my father's firm. She had disappeared shortly after I was born. The official records said she moved back to her home country, but Grandma's notes told a different story. My father had used his influence to threaten her, to strip her of her rights, and to buy my existence to satisfy a clause in a family trust that required him to have 2 heirs to inherit the bulk of the estate. I was nothing but a biological checkbox for a bank account. The rage that surged through me wasn't hot. It was a cold, calculated fire. I felt a strange sense of peace. The girl who wanted their love died on that porch in the rain. The woman sitting in this bunker had work to do. I turned my attention back to the monitors. I had $30 million and the digital keys to their kingdom, but I needed a face. I needed to move in the world without them knowing I was coming. I found a section in Grandma's notebook titled The Ghost Protocol. It contained the contact information for a legal firm in Zurich and a set of encrypted credentials for a shell company named Phoenix Legacy Holdings. By 4 a.m., I had officially activated the company. The first order of business? My father's office building. He had been bragging at dinner about the big expansion he was planning. He was taking out a massive loan to renovate the top 5 floors. He didn't realize that the land the building sat on was owned by a separate entity, one that Grandma had quietly moved into my name months before she died. I drafted a formal notice. It was a simple, cold document stating that the ground lease for the property was being reviewed for material breaches. I hit send. Next, I looked at Ashley. She was my sister, but she had been my chief tormentor. I remembered the time she had ruined my graduation dress because she didn't want me to outshine her. I remembered how she told everyone at my first job interview that I was a charity case. I accessed her social media manager's account. Ashley lived for her image. She had over 1 million followers who believed she was a self-made fashion icon. They didn't know her clothes were bought with money stolen from Grandma's healthcare fund. They didn't know her fiancé was a broke con artist. I uploaded a small encrypted file to her cloud storage. It wouldn't do anything yet. It was a logic bomb. It would wait until the moment she went live for her big engagement announcement party next week. When she hit that go live button, the world wouldn't see her diamond ring. They would see the bank statements, the leaked texts, and the truth about her fraudulent lifestyle. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the bunker, drinking bitter coffee from an old machine I found in the corner. I felt like a spider in the center of a massive web, feeling the vibrations of my enemies as they moved. As the sun began to rise, casting a weak gray light through the cracks in the farmhouse floorboards above, I saw a car pull up to the gate on the security feed. It was a black SUV, my father's car. My heart skipped a beat. Had they found out already? No, it was too soon. I watched the monitor as he stepped out of the car. He looked furious. He was clutching a piece of paper, the notice I had sent from Phoenix Legacy Holdings. He didn't know it was me, but he knew his empire was shaking. He walked up to the porch and kicked the door. "I know you're in there," he roared. "Did you tell someone? Did you talk to the lawyers? I told you to stay in this hole and rot, not talk to the press." He thought I had leaked something. He didn't realize I was the something. I sat perfectly still in the bunker, watching him on the screen. He looked so small from this angle. He looked like a man who was realizing for the first time that the floor wasn't as solid as he thought. He kicked the door again, but the farmhouse was old and sturdy in ways he didn't understand. Finally, he spat on the porch and stormed back to his car. "You're going to regret the day you were born," he screamed before slamming his car door. I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had in years. "No, Dad," I whispered to the screen. "You are." I went back to the keyboard. I had one more thing to do before I could rest. I needed to find Nicole. I needed to find my mother. If she was still out there, I would find her. And I would make sure she saw the downfall of the people who stole her child. But as I searched the private investigator files Grandma had left behind, I found something that made me drop my coffee cup. The man my father had paid in that video, the man in the dark suit, he wasn't a lawyer. He was a high-ranking official in the city's police department, and he was still on my father's payroll. This wasn't just a financial war anymore. This was a dangerous game of cat and mouse. If I made one wrong move, I wouldn't just be poor, I'd be dead. The coffee cup shattered against the concrete, the dark liquid spreading like a bruise across the floor. I didn't care. My eyes were locked on the image of the man in the suit. His name was Commissioner Miller. In the public eye, he was a hero, the man who cleaned up the city's streets. In Grandma's files, he was the cleaner. He didn't catch criminals. He made sure the right people's crimes never saw the light of day. And my father had been his biggest client for over 2 decades. I realized then that my exile wasn't just a fit of temper. My father threw me out because Grandma's death had made him nervous. He knew she had secrets, and he needed me away from the luxury of the city so he could search her belongings without me watching. He didn't think I'd find anything in this shack. He thought I'd be too busy crying over my broken life to look under the floorboards. I sat back down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I had to move faster. If Miller was involved, my father had a shield I couldn't pierce with just money. I needed leverage. I opened a new window and began searching for Miller's vulnerabilities. Grandma's data mining tool, which she had nicknamed the Ledger, was already light years ahead of me. It had flagged a series of encrypted communications between Miller and a private offshore server. I bypassed the first layer of security, then the second. On the third, a prompt appeared. Voice authorization required. I froze. I didn't have Miller's voice, but I had something better. I had Grandma's archives. I searched her audio files and found a recording from 5 years ago. It was a gala dinner. You could hear the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of wealthy voices. And there it was, Miller giving a speech about integrity. Using an AI voice cloning tool Grandma had tucked away in a subfolder, I isolated his voice. Within minutes, I had a digital key that sounded exactly like the commissioner. Authorization Miller 7492, the AI-generated voice spoke into the system. Access granted. The file that opened made the video of my birth look like a bedtime story. It was a list of every problem Miller had solved for my father and his elite circle. Unpaid taxes, accidental fires at competing construction sites, and, most chillingly, the silenced witnesses. My mother's name, my real mother, Nicole, was on that list. Next to her name was a single word, relocated. There was a coordinate link. I clicked it. It pointed to a small, isolated town in northern Canada, a place where the wind howls and the sun barely touches the ground for half the year. She wasn't dead. They had just sent her to a frozen prison of anonymity, threatening her with Miller's power if she ever tried to return. But there was something else in that file. A scheduled payment. My father was set to transfer $5 million to Miller's offshore account in 48 hours. The memo read, "Final disposal, Farmhouse estate." My breath hitched. They weren't just letting me rot here. They were planning to burn this place down with me in it to clear the title and destroy whatever evidence Grandma had left behind. They thought they were tying up the last loose end. I looked up at the ceiling, at the rotten wood and the peeling wallpaper. I was sitting in a tinderbox, and the man I called Dad was holding the match. "Fine," I whispered, a cold smile touching my lips. "Let's see who burns first." I didn't have 48 hours. I had maybe 36. I went to work on my father's corporate accounts again. This time, I didn't just move numbers. I initiated a hostile takeover bid from Phoenix Legacy Holdings. I used the $30 million Grandma left me as a massive down payment to short his stock. In the world of high finance, a sudden, massive short sell from an unknown entity is like blood in the water. Within an hour, other investors, the sharks my father called friends, started to panic. They began dumping their shares, afraid of a scandal. The stock price began to plummet. On my second monitor, I watched my mother's private security feed. She was in her dressing room, frantic, clutching her phone. She was calling my father, but he was probably too busy watching his net worth evaporate to answer. Then, I did something Grandma's notes suggested for extreme measures. I accessed the city's digital billboard network. I didn't put up a message, not yet. I just cued a single image, the black and white photo of Nicole holding me in the nursery. I set the timer for the exact moment my father would be walking into his emergency board meeting the next morning. I was no longer the girl crying in the rain. I was the storm. I spent the rest of the night reinforcing the bunker's entrance. Grandma had installed a secondary, manual locking mechanism that could only be operated from the inside. If they tried to burn the house, the bunker would remain an airtight, fireproof vault. As I worked, I found an old trunk in the corner of the bunker. I pried it open. Inside wasn't money or data. It was a collection of my childhood things. My first drawing, a ribbon I won in second grade, a lock of my hair. Grandma had been saving the pieces of me that my parents tried to throw away. She had loved me when no one else did, and she had spent her final years ensuring I'd have the power to protect myself. I sat on the floor of the bunker, surrounded by the ghosts of my past and the tools of my future. I felt a strange sense of gratitude. The farmhouse wasn't a ruin. It was a cocoon. And tomorrow, the world would see what had been growing inside it. I checked the gate camera one last time before trying to get an hour of sleep. The black SUV was gone, but a new car had taken its place. A plain, silver sedan. 2 men were sitting inside, their faces obscured by shadows. Miller's men? They were early. I reached for the console and activated the farmhouse's defensive perimeter. It was a series of high-intensity strobe lights and a sonic frequency alarm that could shatter glass. "Come and get me," I whispered. My father is losing his fortune, Miller is sending his goons, and I'm trapped in a bunker with a secret that could bring down the city. How do I get out of this alive? The silver sedan sat at the edge of the property like a predator, waiting for the sun to go down. I watched them through the grainy night vision lens of the gate camera. One of the men rolled down his window to flick a cigarette butt into the mud. He looked bored. That was his first mistake. He thought he was guarding a helpless girl in a shack. He didn't know he was standing on the doorstep of a fortress. I retreated to the main console, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 32 hours until the disposal payment. 24 hours until the board meeting. But only minutes, maybe, until those men decided to stop waiting and start acting. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Let's see what else this place can do. I opened a file labeled Environmental Controls. It wasn't about the thermostat. It was a map of the entire farmhouse grounds, dotted with hidden sensors and deterrents. Grandma had spent years turning this derelict property into a giant trap. I clicked a button labeled Phase 1, Disorientation. Suddenly, the silent, dark woods surrounding the silver sedan erupted into life. High-frequency speakers, hidden in the hollows of old oak trees, began to emit a sound so piercing it was just at the edge of human hearing, a sound that triggers primal anxiety and nausea. On the monitor, I saw the man in the passenger seat cover his ears, his face contorting in pain. Then, the high-intensity strobe lights kicked in. They weren't just bright, they were programmed to flicker at a frequency that made it impossible for the human eye to track movement. To the men in the car, the world was now a jagged, nauseating blur of white light and agonizing sound. They scrambled out of the sedan, stumbling into the mud, their hands over their eyes. I watched, cold and detached, as they retreated toward the gates, tripping over their own feet. They didn't even look back as they piled into the car and sped away, the tires spinning uselessly in the muck before catching grip. They'd be back, and they'd bring more men, but I had bought myself a few more hours of silence. I turned back to the digital war. My father's stock was still sliding, but he was fighting back. He had released a press statement claiming the hostile takeover was a fraudulent attempt by a disgruntled former employee. He was trying to stabilize the market. "Former employee?" I muttered. "You wish." I accessed the city's electric grid control for the block where my father's mansion sat. It was a small, petty move, but I needed him stressed. I needed him rattled so he would make a mistake. Click. The lights in his house went out. Click. The backup generators were bypassed. I watched through a hacked security camera in his hallway as he ran through the house with a flashlight, screaming at my mother to find the circuit breaker. He looked pathetic. The powerful man who had shoved me into the rain was now terrified of the dark. But I couldn't get distracted by small victories. I needed to find my mother, my real mother, Nicole. I reopened the coordinates Grandma had left. Town, Oakhaven. Population, 400. It was a company town, owned by a subsidiary of the very corporation my father was trying to protect. They hadn't just moved her, they were monitoring her. I used the bunker's satellite link to bypass the local Oakhaven landlines. I found a registered number for a small bakery in the center of town. The owner's name? Nicole Miller. They had even forced her to take the commissioner's last name, a sick reminder of who owned her life. I picked up the secure headset. My hand was shaking so hard I had to grip the desk. What do you say to the woman you were stolen from? How do you tell her that her daughter isn't just alive, but is currently dismantling the lives of the people who tore them apart? The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Oakhaven Bakery, a soft, tired voice said. My breath caught. It was a voice I had heard in my dreams, a voice that sounded like a lullaby I'd forgotten the words to. Nicole? I whispered. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, a sharp, hitched sound. Who is this? She asked, her voice trembling. If this is Miller, I told you I haven't left. I'm staying right here. It's not Miller, I said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek. It's the baby from the nursery. It's the girl from the white and black video. The sound that came from her was a sob so deep it felt like it was tearing through the phone line. My baby? My little bird? I'm here, I said, my voice gaining strength, and I'm coming for you. But first, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're in danger, but I'm the one with the power now. I need you to go to the back of your shop, find the floorboard with the loose knot, and take out what's inside. Grandma's notes had said she'd hidden a care package for Nicole years ago, just in case. How did you... Nicole trailed off. Wait. I've lived in fear for 24 years. They told me you were dead. They told me you died in the hospital. They told me you were dead. They lied about everything. I said, my eyes hardening as I looked at the monitors showing my father's mansion. But the lying stops tomorrow. Stay on the line. I'm going to guide you out of there. As I began to walk my mother through her own escape, a red alert flashed on my main screen. The silver sedan hadn't just gone for backup. They had gone for the heavy machinery. A bulldozer was currently being unloaded from a flatbed truck at the end of the driveway. Behind it, a black van with tinted windows pulled up. Miller wasn't waiting for the 48-hour mark anymore. He was going to level the house tonight. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. The board meeting was in 6 hours. My mother was 3,000 miles away, and a 10-ton piece of steel was about to crawl over my head. Mom, I have to go, I said. Check the box. There's a passport and a key to a private jet in the city of Whitehorse. Go, now. I hung up and turned to the defensive perimeter controls. The strobe lights wouldn't stop a bulldozer. The sonic frequency wouldn't dent steel. I had one card left to play. It was a file Grandma had marked, in case of total loss. I opened it. It wasn't a weapon. It was a live broadcast link to every major news outlet in the state. I looked at the camera lens built into the monitor. I looked at my reflection, the dirt on my face, the dark circles under my eyes, and the fire in my soul. You want to tear this house down? I whispered to the men outside. Then let's make sure the whole world is watching when you do. I hit the go live button. The ground began to vibrate. It wasn't the low hum of the servers anymore. It was a deep, tectonic shudder that rattled the teeth in my skull. Above me, the farmhouse groaned as the bulldozer's blade made contact with the front porch. Dust drifted down from the bunker's ceiling like gray snow. I stared at the screen. The Go Live indicator was glowing a steady, defiant red. My name is Nicole's daughter, I said, my voice echoing in the small concrete room. I wasn't whispering anymore. I was clear, cold, and lethal. And if you're watching this, You're witnessing the final desperate act of a man who stole a child, built an empire on lies, and is currently trying to bury the truth under 10 tons of rubble. On my secondary monitor, the news feeds were already picking it up. Breaking. Viral stream claims corporate conspiracy. The contrast was perfect. The grainy, terrifying footage of the bulldozer tearing through the house, side by side with the black and white nursery video of my father buying me. The bulldozer hit the main support beam. The farmhouse above me didn't just break, it screamed. Wood splintered with the sound of gunfire. The kitchen island, the one that had hidden my gateway to freedom, was crushed into toothpicks. In the van outside, I saw Commissioner Miller step out. He was holding a radio, his face twisted in a snarl. He looked up at the house, then at his phone. He must have seen the stream. He realized he wasn't just clearing a site, he was executing a girl on national television. He signaled the bulldozer to stop. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. I could hear the settling of the ruins above me. I was trapped. The exit was blocked by tons of debris. You can't hide in a hole forever. Miller's voice boomed from a megaphone outside. The ground lease is terminated. This property is being reclaimed. Come out now, and we can talk about a settlement. A settlement? I laughed, the sound sharp and jagged. I leaned into the microphone. You mean like the one you took 24 years ago to kidnap me? I don't want your money, Commissioner. I already have my father's. I hit a sequence on the keyboard. Execute. Market flood. The $30 million Grandma left me had been the bait. Now, I released the hook. I dumped the controlling interest I had secretly acquired in the holding company that owned my father's office building. But I didn't sell it to another investor. I sold it to his biggest rival for $1, under the condition that they immediately begin eviction proceedings. I watched the power reversal happen in real time. My father's private phone line, which I was still monitoring, lit up. It was his lead attorney. Sir, the lawyer's voice was panicked. We just lost the building. Not the business, the literal building. They're changing the locks on the headquarters right now. And the SEC, they're at your front door with a warrant for the Miller payments. My father's voice came through the line, sounding like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. How? Who is doing this? It's coming from the farmhouse, sir. It's coming from inside the house. I saw my father pull up to the gate in a different car, a rental. He jumped out, stumbling toward Miller. He looked at the half-demolished house, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and realization. He finally understood that I wasn't just a useless girl. I was the ghost of every sin he'd ever committed. He pushed past the men and ran toward the ruins of the porch. Stop! He screamed at the bulldozer driver. She has the codes. She has the access. If she dies, the encryption locks everything. We'll be bankrupt in an hour. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. He didn't want to save me. He wanted to save his bank account. I sat back in the chair, watching the chaos on my screens. In Oak Haven, the GPS tracker in the care package I'd sent my mother showed her moving toward the private airfield. She was safe. She was flying toward me. But the air in the bunker was starting to feel thin. The ventilation shafts were partially blocked by the fallen roof. A red light began to blink on the life support panel. Oxygen level, 82%, and falling. I'm not coming out, I whispered into the live feed, knowing millions of people were hanging on every word. Because if I come out, you'll kill me. If I stay in here, the truth stays alive. So, I'll wait. I'll wait for the real police. I'll wait for the world to see what's in the safe deposit box Grandma left at the city bank. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was closing the open loop. I didn't have a safe deposit box at the bank, but they didn't know that. Miller and my father huddled together near the van. They were arguing. Miller pointed his gun at the house, then at my father. The alliance was breaking. The pressure was turning the coal of their secrets into a diamond-hard panic. Suddenly, Miller turned and climbed back into the van. He was leaving. He was a rat, and the ship was sinking. He knew the live stream made this a lost cause. He was going to try to reach the border before the warrants were finalized. My father stood alone in the mud, looking at the wreckage of the house. He fell to his knees. Please, he sobbed, the sound captured perfectly by the hidden microphones. "Please, just stop the transfer. I'll give you whatever you want." "I want the truth," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "Tell the camera. Tell the world what you did to Nicole. Tell them why you bought me." He looked into the lens of the hidden gate camera, his face a mask of defeat. He knew it was over. If he didn't talk, he'd be poor. If he did talk, he'd go to prison. But to a man like him, being poor was a fate worse than death. He opened his mouth to speak, but a loud crack echoed through the property. The rest of the farmhouse roof collapsed. The screen in front of me went black. The power flickered. The hum of the servers died, replaced by a terrifying, heavy silence. I was in total darkness. The silence was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of a library. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The air felt thick, tasting of pulverized drywall and ancient insulation. I sat in the darkness, my heart a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs. "Grandma?" I whispered. It was a childish reflex, reaching out for a woman who was already gone. But then, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound started. Click, click, click. Emergency lights, the low-voltage, deep red kind used in submarines, pulsed into life. They were powered by a separate battery bank Grandma had tucked behind the server racks. The bunker was bathed in a bloody, surreal glow. I looked at the monitors. They were dead. The external cameras had been severed when the roof came down. I was officially blind. "Oxygen level, 64%, the mechanical voice of the backup system announced. It sounded distorted, like it was speaking underwater. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I had to get out. Not just for me, but for Nicole. She was in the air right now, flying toward a daughter she hadn't held in 24 years. I couldn't let her land at an empty grave. I moved toward the steel door, but the sight stopped me cold. The frame was twisted. A massive oak beam from the floor above had slammed down directly across the hatch, wedging itself into the concrete casing. I pushed. I threw my entire weight against it. It didn't even vibrate. I was buried under the weight of my own inheritance. I sat back down on the floor, the red light casting long, jagged shadows against the wall. I looked at the black notebook. There had to be a way out. Grandma didn't build a fortress just to turn it into a coffin. I flipped to the very last page. There was no text, just a hand-drawn diagram of the bunker's ventilation system. One of the shafts didn't lead to the roof. It led horizontally 50 feet out, toward the old well in the backyard. It was an escape crawlway. But as I looked at the narrow opening near the ceiling, a new sound began to filter down. It was a wet, rhythmic thudding. Rain. The storm had returned, and without a roof to catch it, the water was pouring into the ruins of the farmhouse. I looked up and saw a steady drip coming through the twisted vent. Then a stream. If the ruins acted like a funnel, the bunker wouldn't just be a tomb, it would be a pool. I scrambled to the desk and grabbed the hardware wallet and the notebook, stuffing them into my waterproof jacket. I climbed onto the server racks, the metal groaning under my weight, and reached for the vent cover. My fingernails tore as I pried at the rusted screws. "Come on!" I hissed, the panic finally beginning to bleed through my resolve. "Come on!" The vent popped open, and a gush of cold, muddy water hit me square in the face. I coughed, wiping the grit from my eyes. I pulled myself up into the narrow metal tube. It was tight, so tight, I could feel the cold steel pressing against my chest and back. I began to crawl. Every inch was a battle. The air in the pipe was stale and smelled of wet earth. Behind me, I could hear the water rushing into the bunker, a waterfall that signaled the end of my sanctuary. I didn't look back. I couldn't. 50 feet felt like 50 miles. My elbows were raw, and my breath was coming in ragged gasps. Then, the pipe ended. I pushed against a wooden slat, and it gave way. I tumbled out, falling 6 feet into a pile of wet hay. I was in the old barn, 30 yards away from the collapsed house. I lay there for a moment, the rain drumming on the tin roof of the barn, gasping in the sweet, cold air. I was alive. I crawled to the barn door and peered out. The scene at the farmhouse was a nightmare. The house was a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal. My father was still there. He was sitting in the mud, his head in his hands, illuminated by the flashing blue and red lights of police cars. But they weren't Miller's cars. These were state troopers. The live stream had worked. It had bypassed the local corruption and triggered a high-level response. I saw officers zip-tying my father's hands. I saw them searching the van that Miller had abandoned. And then I saw a familiar figure step out of a black sedan that had just pulled up. It was my mother, not the woman who raised me. Nicole. She looked older than the video, her hair streaked with silver, but she had the same eyes. My eyes. She was screaming my name, trying to break through the police line toward the ruins of the house. My daughter, she's in there. You have to dig. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to scream that I was here. But then I saw a shadow moving near the edge of the woods. A man was watching her. He was holding a long-range rifle, his eyes fixed on Nicole. It was Miller. He hadn't run for the border. He was a cornered animal, and he was going to take the one thing that mattered most to me before he went down. He was aiming at the woman who had just found her way back to me. I looked around the barn. My eyes landed on the heavy-duty tractor parked in the shadows. The keys were in the ignition. Grandma always kept them there. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a badge. But I had 12 tons of industrial steel and a debt to settle. I climbed into the seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a low, guttural growl that drowned out the rain. "You're not taking anything else from me," I whispered. I slammed the tractor into gear and floored it, crashing through the barn doors and charging into the light. The tractor surged forward, its massive tires churning the mud into a chocolate-colored froth. Miller heard the roar of the engine and turned, his eyes widening as he realized he was no longer the hunter. He tried to pivot his rifle toward me, but the terrain was against him. He slipped on the rain-slicked slope, his shot going wide and whistling harmlessly into the dark trees. I didn't stop. I steered the heavy steel frame directly between him and Nicole, creating a wall of iron that shielded her from his view. Miller scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of panicked rage, but before he could aim again, the state troopers were on him. Drop the weapon, hands in the air. The rifle clattered to the ground. Within seconds, the man who had played God with our lives for 24 years was pinned to the earth, his face pressed into the very mud he'd tried to bury me in. I cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic sobbing of the woman standing by the police line. I climbed down from the tractor, my legs shaking, my clothes a ruin of grease and silt. I walked past the officers, past the flashing lights, and past the man in handcuffs who used to be my father. He looked up at me as I passed, his mouth opening as if to offer one last lie, one last explanation. I didn't even give him the satisfaction of a glance. He was already a ghost. "Mom?" I whispered. Nicole froze. She turned slowly, her eyes searching my face, tracing the lines of a chin and a brow she hadn't seen since a nursery in a different life. She let out a sound that wasn't a word, just a pure, raw release of 2 decades of grief. When she held me, the world finally stopped shaking. She smelled like cedar and rain, a memory I didn't know I had until that very second. "I've got you," she sobbed into my hair. "I've got you, my little bird." The aftermath was a landslide. With the evidence from Grandma's bunker and my father's desperate recorded confession, the case against the elite of the city became the trial of the century. Commissioner Miller is currently serving a life sentence for kidnapping and racketeering. My parents and Ashley, they lost everything. The SEC seized their assets, the bank foreclosed on the mansion, and Ashley's fiancé vanished the moment the first headline hit, taking the last of her secret savings with him. The last I heard, Ashley was working at a low-end retail store in a city where nobody knows her name. She finally learned the value of $1, just like my father wanted for me. As for the farmhouse, I didn't tear it down. I rebuilt it. The bunker is still there, but now it's a server room for Phoenix Legacy Holdings. We use Grandma's data mining technology for something different now, finding missing children and exposing the kind of people who think they can buy a soul. I sat on the new porch this morning, watching the sun rise over the fields. Nicole was in the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the screen door. The useless daughter had become the architect of a new life. They thought they gave me nothing. They thought they threw me away, but they forgot one thing. A seed only grows when it's buried in the dark. This was a story about the strength we find when we have nothing left to lose. It's a reminder that no matter how deep they try to bury the truth, it will always find a way to the light. If this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps me keep sharing these narratives of justice and redemption. I have a question for you all. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? How did you prove them wrong? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. For another story of a powerful comeback and hidden secrets, click the video on the screen now. See you in the next one.